Hey guys, it's Eric from foundersbeta.com, and I'm so excited to have Nikhil on board with us for our career spotlight. Nikhil, thanks so much for joining us today.
Pleasure to be here today, Eric. Thank you so much for the invite.
So I know you've been building startups and you've been in the industry for some time. So love to hear more about your story. Maybe from the beginning, how did you get into
Wow.
potentially building your company, and then later on to the transition that you made to your new role. So
hmm
let's go for it.
Sure, sure. Yeah. Oh man, my story starts back quite a few years now. I've been in tech and startups for 8 years now. I think a little bit more than that now. And I really got started actually from a web development standpoint. So I was a self-taught developer. I did Code Academy and all the resources that were around back in 2012, 2013. Got really excited about the potential of, actually at that time I was very interested in open source. So my background is literally in working on open source projects and working with companies as an open source advocate, as an open source developer. I had an early like freelance gig that I did was I was literally helping a company get involved in open source and giving back to the community that they were a part of. So
Right.
a lot of it was a really like interesting start. Can't say I know a lot of people who sort of make some leaps from that to startups necessarily, but what it did was it sparked my interest in so many different opportunities. Like working in open source, you're just going through GitHub and you're finding crazy products online, right? You're finding
Right.
you're finding different people are building literally machine learning algorithms out of their garage, like literally, right, like in their
Right.
free time,
Right.
and working with hundreds of other contributors and people who help them work on this project. So it's incredible. At that time I remember to like I was doing the open source web development stuff for, I'll say, like roughly 4 years, and then by accident I stumbled upon a actually not one but multiple different AI, like machine learning resources that were revolving around chatbots. So around the time where I stumbled upon those on GitHub, that was actually before Facebook Messenger even had chatbots. But I remember there were different platforms like Rasa AI, and there was, I think it was called Howdy.ai. There were different frameworks that essentially
Hmm.
empower people to build you know virtual assistants, right? And at that time that was all the hype. And through learning about those, I got really interested in what it would look like to be more involved with that industry, and actually ended up I spent some time in back then I spent some time in San Francisco, went to all the early meetups
Right. Right.
that were around this topic. And what ended up happening was just because of my interest and my proximity to understanding more than just the development side of that world, I actually joined forces with a friend of mine who I've known from the development industry to start a startup that was specifically helping empower conversational AI experiences in hospitality. So things
Nice.
like hotels and hospitals. We were working on some incredible pilots, and great experience. It was a great opportunity to sort of get my feet wet in sort of that early venture experience, after being sort of in a world where things were moving fast, but a lot of the companies I work with in the open source sphere were much more established. This was literally a new venture. And as the story goes, like it was a couple of years working on the startup. We didn't quite find product market fit. We didn't really, the market that we were working with was it moves fairly slowly, works with a lot of
Right.
legacy software. And just because of that experience, and because of the fit we couldn't find, me and my co-founder transitioned out. And I was sort of once we sort of shut down that operation, I was really inspired to take on a new role in the world of product, actually. And that's what going to be pretty relevant to today. I had that AI experience and understanding of how to build a team around AI and work around major concepts there. But I also love the idea of, rather than just being a developer and sort of like coding is fun and stuff, but also managing people, hiring, going through that entire process of bridging non-technical and technical aspects into one, for startups, tech companies, companies of any variety, really. It just got me so excited. So I was head of product at a D2C startup, at a
Mhm.
conversational AI startup. I was doing it sort of like independent contracting for a lot of different companies, product marketing help as well, just everything I could to immerse myself after walking away from that startup experience, but also offering that technical mind as well. And essentially all of that led up to, I think, one of my largest, like one of my most ambitious
Mhm.
experiences in my career is the company I'm working with right now, chatmode.io. I'm a business partner, consulting partner, and head of operations there, currently helping, we work with anything from tech companies to Fortune 500 companies integrate AI into their sort of like into their infrastructure, basically. So
Mhm.
things like the workplace. We work with some companies on on things that are, more, we're just doing consulting on how AI can be part of that R&D roadmap, right? And I get to work with a lot of incredible people, incredible companies, and sort of see the cutting edge. And our company is a Microsoft partner, so we also get a lot of opportunities to work with, obviously Microsoft and people internally there and their resources internally. Again, going back to open source in some way, right?
Right.
Being able to utilize their resources. So yeah, that's what I'm currently working on. I'm about a year in. I have a lot of other crazy projects that I work on. I'll touch on briefly. I angel invest a little bit right now. I'm a co-owner in an esports organization. I'm working on some other really cool communities in that realm as well, in gaming, things like that in my free time whenever I have it. It's sort of hard to find, but yeah, it's incredible, being back right now. I'd say I'm sort of back in venture mode, right? Where it's like the company that I'm currently with, it's actually kind of been around, but this is a new iteration. So in a sense, it feels like a startup. It has that rush, it has that feeling. And yeah, I get to apply a lot of what I've learned, but I also want to, I know we have some topics to cover today, and I may not be doing day-to-day head of product management type stuff right now, but I can still I still want to touch on that and talk about sort of how that's all come together. So yeah, that's my answer to the first question.
Right.
A little
That's
bit about
great.
myself.
Yeah, let's talk about product, because I mean, you have so much experience. So for our
Sure.
audience that, like, let's say they want to break into like product roles, what advice do you have for them?
Yeah, so the product role, I mean, I'll be honest, like, experience is still, as cliche as that sounds,
Right.
immersing yourself like in experiences that get you close to product are really important. And actually, I think those experiences, in my humble opinion, a lot of them are around if you're in sales, but you're asking the right questions and you're tracking how the product is being built, that's a way to learn product, right? On the flip side, if you're more of a technical person, if you learn a little bit about the major, how should I call it, stacks, right, that people are building their products on currently, and looking at how people are designing, things to better find product market fit. There's a lot about understanding, in my opinion, the many operations that go into specifically, like tech companies. I think that's where the most fruitful opportunity for learning is for anyone trying to get into product. Is I think there's big companies that are trying product too, but looking at smaller companies, following journeys of startups, I mean, that's an incredible way to learn. And I learned from actually starting a startup, but a lot of that was also from taking a look around at competitors and other people in the space and things like that, and learning from how they were growing, how they were pitching. A lot of meetups. I think one of my let me think of like a good example. So Product School is my favorite resource in the last few years in terms of product education. Also, I think they're all over the country. I've been to them now. There's like, product management meetups. Like, I think those are in person. Talking about product is such a cool way to learn it. I got to be complete. And I know that's missing right now, but it's, I've always been a fan. I'm an extrovert personally. So I love talking shop. And that's been one of the fastest ways that I've learned about, or I've been able to accelerate my efforts in talking to other startup founders or people who are running tech companies, running product at tech companies, and understanding, a better perspective. And then also, I've spoken to people at Samsung and Google and other big companies, really the big tech that also do products. So getting that layer of knowledge at things like meetups and, through networking has been sort of my superpower, is really understanding sort of the journeys of different people and not just companies that go through the product realm, right? And then I think the other thing is, there's a lot of incredible resources. I'm trying to think of a few, but maybe even better, so I should mention some products that I look up to a lot.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Notion's a great startup to look at in terms of understanding product. Stripe, I mean, obviously that one's crazy.
Right.
Plaid. I've been looking at a lot of fintech, actually, to be completely honest with you. So there's I found a cool one recently, privacy.com. There's just been some incredible startups I've seen in that space. I think in consumer, I'll say Clubhouse is definitely a cool. I don't know if my product design inspiration comes from there. I think they still have a lot of work to do, but in terms of how they found product market fit, how they create hype, there's definitely specific decisions that are good to look at there. TikTok, obviously, the concept of doom scrolling, Instagram, those things might sound like a lot of, different UI and UX inspiration, but trying to dissect some of those products and looking at it from a design decision aspect, or how different things function when you click on them, when you hover on them.
Right.
Those are all elements that I think are, really important to understand how it's bridging together, the different things within a company, right? Product, or design rather, the engineering side of it, the intelligence side of it, right? If you use if you use products that are powered by GPT-3, right? You can see those are also great. I can't even, there's too many to name now. And I can't remember one that's like, there's one I'm thinking of for sure that I think it allows you to help write like articles and stuff like that.
Right. There's quite a bit. Right.
Those are great to look at though. Those are awesome because it gives you a sense of how you're using this really, really cutting edge technology and how it's merging within an interface or within the way you're talking to it. And just, it's a lot about dissecting products. I think like I said, it's not necessarily too different from being a designer and trying to think about how you would redesign a product or how you'd look at UI UX differently. But this is more of like, how do you make those decisions, right? How do you find ways to bridge the technical aspect, the interface aspect, the support aspect as well? And I think there's a lot to learn from that. So yeah, I'd say those are some good ones to learn from. Also, I'd say actually Mozilla has some pretty incredible, just like not even necessarily like close to product, but just in the way their philosophy behind how they built the browsers and the different tools that they've been a part of, how they do open source, things like that. That's been a great lesson and Microsoft, of course. I will give a shout out to the company that I work fairly often with. They have very specific resources for understanding how they make their decisions in the never ending Azure updates that they do and never ending updates to all their Office 365 Teams, things like that. If you're on LinkedIn enough, you'll find the PMs are actually posting, the product leads, product managers, product designers. They're all posting on why these decisions have come about and the data behind making the decisions to integrate certain features, make certain design aspects, remove certain things. And that's been incredible. Like lately, I've been learning from that. Like shout out to the Microsoft Teams team behind the scenes in the product world, because they've been literally posting like updates about how they're doing Microsoft Teams for Education and why they're making certain decisions to make their product more curated to that, and how schools, universities can be empowered to better use that communication tool from within. So yeah, I'll get off my soapbox there, but just wanted to really give the long answer on how to go from ideating how to find product resources all the way to actually going to these product resources and taking advantage of that.
For sure, that's great. So speaking of product, what have you seen for like startups building their MVP like work really well, or sometimes even not work really well? Like what are some tips you may have for founders that are like building that first version and trying to make those critical decisions like you mentioned behind their UX, behind their UI? What have you seen in terms of your experience?
Yeah, this is a great question actually, and I don't want to plug myself too hard, but to give myself a little bit of credibility, companies that I am advising and doing some angel investing for and things like that have been giving me, they've been sort of like, to put it gently, they've been whipping my ass in trying to understand how different people's backgrounds come together to create product structure and frameworks, right? So I just want to mention that this is coming from a lot of different perspectives, but I'll try to compile it down to sort of your question. I think an important part of the MVP, in my humble opinion, I know there's gonna be people who disagree, don't think looking at competitors every day, every hour is very useful. I think that understanding the market and the landscape is very important, but trying to copy the exact design, trying to copy the exact functionality. I mean, there's things you have to do to stay competitive for sure, but also, when you're in that MVP stage, it's good to find shortcomings and look to other, like, if there's a product that looks exactly like yours in a certain industry that you're tackling, cool to look at it for a little bit, but look at how other products are doing it too. And you might be surprised at what you're finding, right? For that MVP stage, and how, they might not be direct competitors, but they're the way that they're targeting their customers that are probably similar to yours, right? I mean, if I'm in ed tech, targeting educators and understanding how teachers use technology versus how administrators at schools use technology, where does that come in? In fintech, how are more educated, financially literate users using products versus, and your product doesn't have to be a Robinhood competitor, but still look at Robinhood. Maybe, I don't know if that's controversial to say, but public.com, right? Right. Whichever are the leading edge there, like look at just look at the way that they're presenting their product, right? That's really key. I think that is key for an MVP, even if they're much bigger than you, even if they're much farther than you in funding, team size, obviously. having a clear understanding that, the MVP, it's not even building it all into an MVP. It's just creating that backlog, creating that icebox, that collection of ideas, talking to customers, talking to investors, just having that vision, having that roadmap. I think one of the most important parts of a product manager, or just a head of product in general, or even a founder trying to play that role of product, is just understanding how accurate you can make your timeline. That is something you have to spend a lot of time on. It has to match with your vision. It has to match with your resources. It has to match with the funding you're getting. All these kind of things are all converging in one place, and understanding, what could be down the line without getting too distracted and without, getting too lost and trying to be exactly who your competitors are. I think that's the key. And I think founders are rewarded for originality. So with product, from a product mindset, the way that I've always done product, and maybe just the companies I've worked with, because I haven't worked at Google as a product manager, but working with companies that are a few years in or who are just starting, experimentation. It's so important to understand the importance of experimentation and understanding the idea of, measuring a process and collecting feedback from users and, breaking things fast or fail fast, right? Even with just certain features that you're building out. I think all those things they may seem daunting, but they are part of the process, right? There's going to be trial and error. There's going to be times that you feel like you're on top of the world with something you rolled out, and then a week later you realize it's the worst decision you've ever made as someone who's leading product, if you're a founder, or if you're someone who's a product lead at an early stage startup. So and I think I honestly think there's very easy ways, even if you're working with other co-founders and partners who don't really get it. I think there's a pretty easy way to explain that, and you just gotta point to all this startup successes throughout history, right? Like Uber started as a black car experiment, right? Airbnb had different launches that they did that were all very experimental and unique, and they still got to where they are today. It wasn't like they went, it maybe took a little bit longer, maybe there were ways to make it more efficient, but experiments give you a chance to really stand out from the crowd, right? Especially in your industry or in your competitive space. So those are, I think, some of the fundamentals that I'd like to share that I personally haven't heard as many people talk about, because I think a lot more people, obviously agile and road mapping and having the right tools and having the right cadence with your developer team, sales teams, whatever, all those things are very important. But I feel like there's some underrated elements of a product manager's journey with an early stage company, or a founder's journey building the product, that aren't talked about. And I think at the top of that is really that concept of how can you, run experiments, measure them, and justify them as well, and find ways to actually maybe beat the curve rather than play it too safe, right? Finding that balance. So that's sort of my statement on that.
Right, that's great. So talking about experimentation is such a key. What are some good elements of having a good experiment? Is it you look at the data? Do you run different experiments at the same time? What are some frameworks you might be able to recommend for our audience there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I got to mention that I was trying to think of that. I could have maybe answered it a minute ago, but I didn't want to rush it. So I'm glad you're bringing that question back, because it's giving me time to think about that. Understand. So prioritization is very important for an early stage startup as well. Not to discount experimentation in any ways, but it has to be a very clear balance, and it can't be too crazy, right? It has to be, there has to be structure, there has to be framework. So it's having a prioritization model, right? It's understanding, where users might be, where the industry might be, and what you can offer it, and being able to prioritize that in a way that can service, something that will get you to product market fit, right? The experimentation, tracking, measuring, understanding comes down to more, it comes down to how granular you want these experiments to be, right? Do you want to take baby steps to get to a bigger experiment? Do you want to run a bigger experiment now? And if you feel like it's not going to lose you money, or it's not going to lose you users, is it worth it? It's elements like that, right? It's trying to look at your roadmap, look at your vision, and have a clear understanding of how big these experiments can be, what their timing is. And I got to be honest with you, it's maybe not an answer everyone loves either, but it is gut decisions there too, right? On which experiments to run, right? You'll be in the middle of something crazy, and you'll be like, I swear, if we just try this one little thing, that could get us more adoption. Why not, right? You're a startup. You're supposed to be trying out different things. Half the fun of it is, not half the fun, like there's always raising and running it and everything, but part of the fun is being able to have, control your own destiny a little bit as a leader in a startup, and being able to manifest something that's never been there before. So, do that carefully, do that with the right prioritization, and do that with the right, it always comes down to look at the users, not necessarily investors. Like investors, there is importance to pandering to them, and there is importance to, working with them. I totally understand that, but your users are the ones giving you money. And hey, if you can bootstrap, even better, right? Like there's just a lot of different ways to gauge the timing of your opportunities and what's valuable at the time. So yeah, it's like timing is an important element, prioritization is an important element, and also understanding your resources and how much shift will happen if you make an experiment is very key and very important. So that's sort of where my mindset is on sharing things that maybe I haven't heard. And like I said, I could go into like talking about how you can make better Agile boards or Trello boards or something like that to manage this as well. But I feel like that's been sort of touched upon quite a bit. Like I want to talk more about I think there's philosophical aspects of that too. So I'm trying to go after those a bit.
Right. That's a great pointer for our audience. So let's shift gears and talk about like remote work, remote work, obviously with what's going on in the world. Where do we see, where do you see AI playing a role in like remote work, or what's the future like?
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy. Like, I wish there was just an artificial intelligence that could take my calls for me, for Zoom, because Zoom, but not this call. This call is great, but there's other calls in the day where I'm, like just kind of twiddling my thumbs, writing notes, and parts of me wish there was an AI so I could get back to doing some of the, like solid work or lead generation or all that pipeline management, all the things I have to do as an operational lead. So that's one thing I wish, but we're still building up the tools for that. So AI in the future of work is something that is kind of what I'm working on right now. I think that with chat mode, most of our projects come down to, building efficiencies for industries that might not necessarily have them. Or we work with, like I said, we work with tech companies on R&D projects and things like that, they're building out products that are going to be AI based for servicing a target or a group of customers that, are just not that could use that productivity and efficiency powered by AI. So that's just to give a little bit of insight there. So the future of, it's not even like remote work. I will say it's like even the future of work. I realize, I've said it in a couple different ways before, like AI can help the future of remote work, but it really is like, now that there's all these hybrid models and everything coming out, there's so many different ways to empower the type of work that you're doing at home, on the go, everywhere in the world. One of my favorite products, I don't know what draws me so much to it, X.AI, right? Where you can schedule emails with the help of, you write an email and there's an automated email response that schedules a call between both of you. And they have other really cool features that I think they're constantly building out to better automate that process of like, an assistant for your email threads. That's incredible. Other products I've seen, and gosh, I'm losing like the name because there actually is more than one that I'm thinking of and they're just kind of all getting jumbled in my head. But there's literally platforms now where you can talk to a voice assistant and that enters, that augments your Salesforce or HubSpot CRM pipeline and allows you to, send leads just through your voice, right? You don't have to do that crazy, process of typing them in, going through portals, going through multiple tabs, confirming, whatever. There's so many incredible tools that are, there's more and more tools coming out that are really allowing for these, sort of shortcut experiences that are just, it's incredible to see right now. There's something about, artificial intelligence, empowering a salesperson, a developer, a head of operations, like anybody, a product manager, just through the concept of being able to do your work a little bit faster. Superhuman, right? The email app, like that has AI that just makes it feel faster, and people notice that, right? People, have a way of, they say, hey, it's like my emails feel better prioritized. My the way that I'm able to write responses is faster. It's crazy. Google's addition of AI helping you, like, I think I want to say it must be pretty sophisticated AI that's helping you finish sentences and emails and Google Docs. That's already saving time in my day. Like some of it is just auto-correcting or making sure the grammar's correct. But I've seen companies and I've seen models that they're working on where it could write, you could write a couple of, that's GPT-3.2, right? Where you could write a couple of sentences and it writes a paragraph for you with the rest, right? And actually make some pretty interesting decisions. And I think, let me put it this way, sort of like thinking in a superhero sense, like or a Spider-Man sense. With great power comes great responsibility. Like I hope these things are going to be used, ethically and properly, and are going to be, like they're going to be doing good in the workplace and not making assumptions or, making people feel left out. I know there's all these biases still to tackle, but there's another crazy part. There's even AI now that's trying to automate the process of tackling bias and collecting data to make sure that workplaces are more inclusive and hiring is more fair. Like these things are it's a domino effect. Like the AI sphere that's enabling companies as big as, your Nationwides of the world, your Deltas of the world, your Accentures, everyone of the world, right? Like, I mean, there's just so many opportunities to like streamline even the process of manufacturing, right? Like there's robotics, there's AI, and a lot of that. I'm just, to sort of bring it back down to earth. Like I work a lot in the software field of that. Like I know there's AIs that are going to be building cars and that are going to be, automating packaging and whatever, right? But the software behind that allows, stakeholders and manufacturing floor managers and things like that to track the efficiencies of their logistic operations, or airlines to track, if they're licensing out planes to do, to send packages instead of like passengers, right? Like being able to see how much ROI that's getting, and being able to better manage those things around the world, so they're, so people are getting customers and or people are getting packages better and customers are keeping happy. All these things basically are coming down to, a world where we have a lot more time to focus on, like as employees, as people who are working as cogs in the machine, we can focus on much less mundane tasks and actually making an impact in our organizations, and being, contributing in a way that allows this AI to do the mundane work better, while we can tackle everything else. And while, we won't have to work holidays anymore, we won't have to work overtimes anymore. Like we can focus more on leisure and life. And I think that's something very, very important to think about, coming up is efficiency, productivity, all these different kinds of items. And yeah, the future of work with AI, it's super bright. And I'll just say that there's a lot of big companies to look up to that are slowly starting to publish their findings. AT&T, I think, did a write-up that, I wrote it up. I like shared it on LinkedIn, and what, circulated quite a bit, because it was about hiring, like AI and hiring. Like people just are interested more and more, even if they're not AI engineers. Like anyone can have access to that data, and people are bringing it down to earth, and it's important to track. And I think it's going to make waves, in the way that we're doing work in the very, very near future. So, yeah,
that's great. So let's talk about working at a startup. Oftentimes there's just a blend right now, between balance. How do you keep the balance? Any tips there for our audience?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I'm sometimes the worst person. Like I don't sleep. I have to work on that. I have to work on that for sure. So nobody asked me for advice on how to rest. I mean, I think like fitness, I know that's like as cliche as it gets, but I'm a big runner, hiker, cyclist. Like I really get into that because it really does clear the mind. I am, sort of I'm personally more of a fan of doing things in the morning. So I kind of start off my days with feeling that, refreshed sense of like adrenaline from a run or from a bike ride, things like that. Those evening runs can be great too, to cool off cool off a little bit, and then have ideas for the next day too. But yeah, I think, it's important to keep yourself healthy, important to eat well, all this kind of things, sleep well. I have to work on that myself, I will be honest, but it is something that makes a difference. And also being able to, with startups, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. You will have to work weekends. You will have to work nights. It's up to you. If you're a founder, if you're a co-founder, I mean, your employees aren't going to do that. Even if it's your first employee, like, they could for a little bit, but they didn't sign up for that. Like, that's how you burn people out. That's how you have employee churn, right? Is, you start to misunderstand, what your role is as an early founder versus an early employee. So recognizing that, like, you will have to make some sacrifices in your life. And the way that I get over those sacrifices, or sort of like, it's going to suck, right? It's going to be like, damn, I really expected to go out this weekend and just take the weekend off. But this deployment was late. This feature was late. This opportunity needs to be fleshed out, more proposal, whatever it is, right? Or support request, right? Having an understanding that these things are going to come up, and being able to set a foundation, a framework for yourself on what to do when it happens is really important, right? Be like, okay, so I'm going to move this, but maybe I'll get off a little bit early next Friday just to make up for this time that I lost an entire weekend. Finding compromises with yourself and with your business partners, and being transparent about what those are. It's great. It creates such a it allows for such an opportunity for good discussions internally to make sure that no one's burning out, no one's hitting walls, no one's having writer's block, or really just like a management block, right? And like how they can do things better. It's like having your own balance, and also if you feel comfortable sharing, having a collective balance, right? With you and your co-founders and the people who are making your company possible, just to make sure that everyone's on the same page. So those are some of my major tips.
That's great. So I always ask the guests on Founders Beta, what's the best advice you've ever gotten, whether it's startups or life?
Yeah. Okay. This is going to be like, I think as like, it came from an interesting person. It's advice that everybody kind of talks about, but I once back in the day, I spoke to I had a friend in the industry who was just like an angel investor, right? Ran many startups, and someone who I didn't even like really ask for this like advice. Like, not to say it was unsolicited, but it just came up in conversation where he was saying like, man, like I just have a hard time investing in companies that don't, where, a startup founder, like nothing wrong with solo founders, but he said in his opinion, having a co-founder is the most important part, because that just shows investors, even angels or wherever you are, that you've convinced one other person to join you on this crazy journey. Right. And I remember thinking like, well, I wonder, because my question was something about like scaling startups, right? It wasn't about like the day one stuff, but then I realized like, shit, that's still important though. Cause you could invite other co-founders a year into your startup, right? And you could trying to convince customers the same way you would convince co-founders, like that's really eye-opening advice. So the advice was quite simply, have a co-founder, but the expansion of that advice was, why would your customers want to work with you if you can't even convince one other person to work on it with you, right? Like there's concepts around that, and those are thought experiments. Those are not necessarily to demotivate, or that's not whatever. That's just to think to yourself a little bit, like how can you better bring people on board, and investors included. So I think the perspective of who mentioned that to me, and knowing that they had invested crazy amounts of money, have started their own startups, but at that time that was a response to a question about scaling. That was eye-opening for me. That was back in honestly, I was back in 2017. That was I'd already had a co-founder for a startup at that time, but I remember that was sort of like that still stuck with me as like, should we have more co-founders? Should we, what will happen if I start another venture? Like, could I do it alone? Like, things like that, right? Where it was just, it came out of random time, but the advice stuck in,
That's great. Yeah, no, that's a great tip. So for our audience that want to get in touch, what's the best way?
Yeah, best way. Okay, so I'm Twitter. Well, admittedly, like the unfortunate reality is Twitter DMs just doesn't it doesn't notify me correctly. It's so hard to track sometimes. So best way is to I'll do my best. Twitter is in terms of interacting with me, and on Twitter itself, I look at replies and stuff like that quite frequently. It's DMs I have to work on a little bit. I'm at Nick Vimal, NIKVIMAL, all one word. On LinkedIn. LinkedIn DM actually is the better way to reach out to me personally if you're looking for that. I'm Nikhil Vimal on there. And then those would be the two best ways. I'll be on Twitch eventually very soon. I'm working on a very cool project in the esports sphere. Not that that's a great way to reach out to me, but maybe to track on some of the cool things that I'm working on. That'll be another source that I'll be publishing about on Twitter. So yeah, I'd say when it comes down to it, Twitter's the best place, but LinkedIn is the best place to have further conversations and really have longer threads. So
Cool. Well, thank you so much again for coming out today and taking your time. And it's been a blast. And for our audience, definitely check out. We'll have the full write-up and the transcript. And stay in touch. So thanks so much again.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Eric. It's been a pleasure. It's been an honor. And thanks again for having me on. This has been great.
Awesome.